This dramatic moment was the beginning of the end for Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. After his long run from the law, repeatedly escaping authorities, he was now caught. He had no idea where he was being taken.
He's accused of being one of the most dangerous drug lords in the world.
Guilty on all counts. The jury coming back with that verdict in the trial of Zeta's cartel boss Marciano Vasquez.
And as you say, the leader of one of, if not the most powerful cartel in Mexico, with tentacles stretching from Central America through Mexico and all the way into the United States.
March 18, 2015. Zetas leader Marciano Vasquez abducted and killed over 150 Mexican civilians in a single day. He's currently in prison, placed under strict security measures, because if you let him out, he'll unleash a new wave of violence in Mexico. So here are some of the most feared cartel members in prison. El Chapo.
Joaquin El Chapo Guzman's final day in court ended the way everyone expected, with the Sinaloa cartel leader sentenced to life in prison, plus an extra 30 years for good measure.
What better name to begin this video with than arguably the most notorious drug lord of our time, Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. Born April 4th, 1957. El Chapo, real name Joaquin Archibaldo Guzman Laora, grew up in a poor family in the rural community of La Tuna, Badiraguato, Sinaloa. His father, who was cattle ranching by day and drug dealing at night, physically abused Guzman regularly. Nevertheless, he introduced him to the drug trade, teaching Guzman the ropes of selling small quantities of marijuana around their neighborhood. However, after El Chapo did the actual work of selling those drugs, his father would squander the profits on everything apart from his family. This pushed Guzman and a few of his cousins to begin their own network of supply by growing a massive marijuana plantation. Once Guzman's dad found out about it, he kicked him out of the house, sending Guzman down the deep dark path of the narcotics underworld. Soon enough, Guzman found himself working with Mexico's first ever drug trafficking organization, the Guadalajara Cartel, led by Miguel Gallardo and a few other drug lords. Now, under their leadership, Guzman with a few other traffickers were supposed to keep an eye on the logistics of the cartel's narcotic shipments. But out of everyone else, what made Guzman stand out was that he made no room for error. If a shipment was delayed or encountered any difficulties, he'd kill the sicario responsible for that. His actions caught the eyes of Felix Gallardo, the man they say is responsible for the countless kilos of cocaine shipped in and out of Mexico today, and the countless lives lost in the process. You see, Felix took Guzman as a direct partner, but after his arrest, Guzman created the Sinaloa cartel, along with a few other notable drug lords in 1987. From there, El Chapo took over the streets of Mexico, navigating the distribution of cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, fentanyl, cannabis, and MDMA into the US, Africa, and every corner of Europe. He's said to have brought in more drugs into the US than any other drug lord in history. And how did he do this, you say? Well, he was using underground tunnels to move a large portion of his shipments. And on top of these tunnels, his men would wage war against anyone who dared interfere with his dealings. Now, the more El Chapo grew, the more he was wanted in Mexico. He was arrested twice, in 1993 and 2014. However, we all know in both cases he executed mind-blowing prison escapes from the toughest and most secure prisons in Mexico. Then in 2016, third time was the charm for Mexico's government. El Chapo was arrested and extradited to the US. He's now serving many life sentences in the most secure US prison of all time, the ADX Florence. And from the looks of things, he'll never really get to be a free man again.
If we can get our hands on El Chapo, arguably the most notorious crime boss in the history of this world, I would say we can get our hands on anyone. It's just a matter of where and when.
Christopher Koch.
The West Kingston Commission of Inquiry on Thursday saw footage for the first time of crime lord Christopher Dudus Koch behind bars after he was captured on June 22, 2010.
Jamaican gang leader Christopher Dudus Koch has arrived in New York under tight security to face charges that he flooded the East Coast with shipments of cocaine and marijuana.
May 2010. The streets of Kingston, Jamaica became a war zone. Security forces attacked the country's most dangerous crime syndicate, the Shower Posse, and its notorious leader, Christopher Dudus Koch. His influence reached from the top of Jamaican politics to the heart of Toronto's drug scene, getting Canadian forces involved to hunt down the drug kingpin, or president, as he liked to be called. Born March 13, 1969, Christopher was the son of Lester Lloyd Koch, a notorious gang leader in Kingston, Jamaica. Lester, together with the gang's co-founder Vivian Blake, oversaw the distribution of huge amounts of cocaine and marijuana throughout Jamaica and the U.S. They were also blamed for more than 1,000 murders in both countries during the late 80s and early 90s. In that period, the Koch family lived a luxurious lifestyle despite everyone around them living in abject poverty. Christopher and his siblings attended a school with children of the country's political elites, but on the downside, Christopher did lose his sister and a few close relatives to gang battles. So in 1990, after the U.S. Department of Justice indicted Lester Koch and other key members of the gang, Christopher would take over as the leader of the Shower Posse. He developed as a community leader, distributing money to the poorest areas, creating employment, and setting up community centers to help children. Chris Koch gained widespread support in the community, to the extent that the Jamaican police had to seek permission from his organization before entering their neighborhood. In 2009, the U.S. sought to extradite Koch on drug trafficking charges. That was a tough spot for Jamaica, with Christopher's supporters arming themselves with guns and causing chaos in Kingston. By May of said year, over 73 people had been killed in the clashes between Jamaican security forces and gunmen in West Kingston. And as the years went by, the numbers kept skyrocketing. Seeing all this damage being done to innocent people made Christopher do what no one thought he would. He surrendered. June 2010. Christopher, dressed like a female wearing both a wig and sunglasses, was on his way to the U.S. Embassy in Kingston to surrender. However, before he got there, he was spotted by security forces and officially arrested. Now, it's not every day you get to see a powerful drug lord surrender to the authorities, but in the case of Chris here, he was tired of the violence and had already lost his sister and father to it. To portray his sincerity, he waived his right to an extradition trial, meaning he'd be taken straight to the U.S. to face the charges. Now, during his trial in the U.S., his family and other supporters portrayed him as a benevolent, philanthropic, and well-mannered individual. By contrast, federal prosecutors would show documents depicting Chris as a man willing to commit brutal acts of violence to support his drug empire. He was implicated in a handful of murders, and in one, he allegedly dismembered the victim with a chainsaw for stealing drugs from him. The Jamaican government would also give him evidence deriving from wiretapping Koch's cell phone before his arrest. It recorded at least 50,000 conversations dating back to 2004. The evidence against him was so overwhelming, and as such, he was given 23 years in prison. He's now being held at the Federal Correctional Institution, Fort Dix, New Jersey, with his release date being January 25, 2030. Oido Guzman Lopez.
Now, Oido Guzman Lopez, the oldest son of the notorious Mexican drug lord known as El Chapo, is in Chicago in U.S. federal custody.
Of all the many children of El Chapo, only one can truly say he's as notorious as his father, and that's Oido Lopez. January 5th, 2023. The Mexican army arrested this guy just a day after he threw this massive party in the Jesus Maria district of Culiacan. It was the second time Oido had been arrested by Mexican authorities, and just like the last time, his arrest triggered a violent conflict in Mexico. Born March 29, 1990. Oido was born to El Chapo's second wife, Griselda. He was raised in Mexico City, spending 4 years of his education at a school run by the Legionaries of Christ. However, Oido had to drop out after the Mexican government put a bounty on his father's head. Then, following his father's second arrest, he founded Los Chapitos, a faction of the Sinaloa Cartel, who tried to disrupt El Chapo's arrest by throwing up street blockades, burning vehicles, and triggering shootouts, killing 29 people, including 10 military personnel. When all that failed, he took over leadership of the Sinaloa Cartel under the guidance of his father's longtime partner, Ismael El Mayo Zambada. October 17, 2019. Members of Mexico's National Guard arrested Oido Guzman in Culiacan. Consequently, a wave of gun battles ensued in the city, with heavily armed cartel hitmen, numbering over 700, ravaging the streets and threatening innocent civilians, all in a bid to get Oido released. With his hands tied and not wanting to lose more innocent lives, the Mexican president, Andrés Obrador, ordered the release of Oido. His actions were condemned by several international bodies, and it seemed like the rumors of the president being unable to curtail the violence were true. But little did they know that this was only a detour for their grand plan. January 5th, 2023. The Mexican army used a chopper and convoy of ground vehicles to execute a pre-dawn raid on Ovidio's residence. After receiving intel of that massive party he threw the night before, within 10 hours of surrounding his location, Ovidio was arrested. As expected, another wave of deadly violence occurred. The only difference now is that the military knew what they were up against. It took personnel from the Army, National Guard, Secretariat of National Defense, and Secretariat of the Navy to capture just one man. And following his capture, he was flown out of Culiacan to Mexico City, where those extradition papers were already being filed. Back in Culiacan, Sinaloa cartel hitmen did everything within their power to force a second release of Ovidio. 10 soldiers, 19 gang members, and 1 police officer were killed during the arrest. However, nothing they could do was going to bring Ovidio back. September 15, 2023, the government of Mexico extradited Ovidio Lopez to the U.S. to face drug trafficking charges. U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland described the extradition as the most recent step in the Justice Department's effort to attack every aspect of the cartel's operations. They say that apple doesn't fall far from its tree, and true to that, both father and son are incarcerated in U.S. prisons, where they're going to spend the rest of their lives. Marola. Now, this guy might not be the first name that comes to mind when talking about the top drug lords out there, but he's definitely one of the most ruthless among the bunch. Born in 1968, Marco Williams Herbaz Camacho, aka Marola, is a Brazilian drug lord and current leader of the largest Brazilian criminal organization, the Primeiro Comando da Capital. Now, beginning his adventures into the world of crime at age 9, Marola got incarcerated for petty crimes and street theft. He would spend more than half his life in prison, reading more than 3,000 books while getting basic education. And by the time he got out, he would work his way into becoming the leader of the PCC. And under his leadership, the crime syndicate ascended the ranks of brutality, trafficking cocaine and other substances received from Mexico into West Africa and other Latin American countries. They've also been responsible for several criminal activities, such as murder, prison riots, bank and highway robberies, pimping, kidnappings and ransom, money laundering, and loan sharking. This guy forced every member to pay him a monthly income, enforcing what he called Devil's Code for each member to abide by. He's also turning that organization into a global mafia, able to influence politics and penetrate the Brazilian economy. Now, at the peak of his criminal career, he ordered more than 29 deadly riots across Brazil and the assassination of Judge Antonio José Machado Diaz, a Brazilian judge who tried to stop the activities of the PCC and who pushed to construct the Penitentiary Readaptation Center in Presidente Bernardes, Sao Paulo. May 2006. A few months before his second and final arrest, Marola organized strategic attacks on Brazilian police, which led to the PCC orchestrating the Sao Paulo violence outbreak that resulted in the deaths of over 150 people, leaving 53 injured. This singular act was far more deadly than that committed by any gang leader in the area, and as such, Marola was captured, charged, and handed multiple life sentences. Once he was back in prison, he granted an interview where he uttered these disturbing words.
"It is you who are afraid of dying, not me. As a matter of fact, here in jail, you can't come in and kill me, but I can order to kill you out there."
Because of the threat he posed, Marola was transferred to the Brasilia Federal Penitentiary, a highly secure prison facility in Brazil, designed to isolate the country's most dangerous criminals. Ociel Cárdenas Guillén. November 9th, 1999. 2 U.S. agents from the DEA and FBI were threatened at gunpoint by Cárdenas and approximately 15 of his henchmen in Matamoros, Mexico. The 2 agents went to Matamoros with an informant to gather intelligence on operations of the Gulf Cartel. However, they were intercepted by Cárdenas and his convoy of armed soldiers. He demanded that these agents and the informant get out of their vehicle, but they refused to obey his orders. So the incident escalated, where he threatened to kill them if they didn't comply. His gunmen were on standby, cocked and loaded, ready to shoot on his command. The agents told him that if they died, it would result in this massive manhunt by the U.S. government, which fortunately worked because Cárdenas eventually let the men go, but threatened to kill him if they ever returned to his territory. And this is why the cartel does not let anyone go, because this led to his arrest and the fall of his criminal empire. Back in the 90s, Cárdenas was the leader of the Gulf Cartel's military wing, Los Zetas. This group earned a reputation in Mexico for their brutal and sinister tactics. They're known for their merciless acts of violence, mass killings, beheadings, and some gruesome displays to instill fear and assert dominance. They've been linked to horrible things like massacres and kidnappings, leaving trails of terror across Mexico. And that just makes us question why he let those agents go. I mean, if he went by his track record, he would have had his men kill him, make a video about it, and then send it to the Mexican government. However, he let him go. And that right there triggered a massive law enforcement effort to crack down on the leadership structure of the Gulf Cartel. In what seemed like a traditional tag team operation, both the Mexican and U.S. governments increased their efforts to apprehend Cárdenas, clamping down on Zetas hideouts across the country and putting a lot of people behind bars. March 14, 2003, after a 6-month operation aimed at capturing this guy, he was finally intercepted and arrested in Matamoros, Tamaulipas. Yet from even behind bars, he controlled their operations and would order certain to force his release. Unfortunately for him, his plans failed, and when he was extradited to the U.S. a few years later to face a lot of charges in connection to his drug trafficking trade, he was handed a 25-year sentence after agreeing to be a rat for the DEA. They confiscated $30 million of assets, along with his 2 private planes. Nevertheless, OCL is still feared behind bars. Rumors say he still controls the Zetas and their drug trafficking operations between U.S. and Tamaulipas. Now, that just might be a rumor. Who knows? Genly Yagon. Now, the story of Yagon is a story of how history's biggest drug bust never uncovered any drugs. It instead revealed millions of dollars stashed by Yagon and his crime syndicate. Born January 31st, 1963, Genly Yagon was a Chinese-Mexican businessman. He moved to Mexico in the 90s and founded several companies, in particular the highly successful chemical importer, Unimed Pharmchem Mexico. This guy was so successful that the then president of Mexico, Vicente Fox, personally presented him with citizenship papers in 2002, officially making him a Mexican citizen. However, that marked the moment his life changed for the worse. In 2007, Mexican federal agents raided his Mexico City mansion. Inside, they would find more than $200 million. The cash was mostly in $100 bills, and they were stashed into wardrobes and strewn throughout the entire house. All in all, the cash weighed over 2 tons, and reportedly took the agents 2 full days just to carry it out. Along with various international currencies, there was also a small arsenal of automatic weapons and 7 luxury cars. The DEA termed this the largest single drug cash seizure the world had ever seen, and the ultimate jackpot for law enforcement. But why exactly was Genly's mansion raided in the first place? Well, through his company, Unimed Pharmchem, he'd been importing the chemicals, ephedrine and pseudoephedrine, from labs in China. Now, these are products that go into making common cold medicines like Sudafed, but they're also the most important precursor chemicals for making crystal meth. This guy was revealed to be a secret high-ranking member of the Sinaloa cartel, importing and supplying these chemicals to organized criminal groups across Mexico. But that's just one side of his story. The other side is, Genly was an avid gambler. Now, his high-rolling gambling habit was actually part of this elaborate but fairly common money laundering scheme, through which crime groups would clean their dirty cash. Genly knew he could take the cash from selling those precursors to Vegas and then get back checks that he could put into banks. A very simple money laundering technique. But the bigger plot twist here is that he was found not guilty of all the charges presented against him in a U.S. court. Nevertheless, he had to explain that boatload of money that was lying around his house. While Genly admitted that the money had originated with the cartels, he claimed that he was told to hide it by the Mexican politician Javier Lozano Alarcón. He claimed that this order had come with a death threat, and that if he was extradited to Mexico, he would be killed. Genly's claim sounded ridiculous to prosecutors in the U.S., but Mexican politics is so widely corrupt that many people in Mexico actually believed him. Genly managed to fight extradition to Mexico for 9 years, but eventually American courts ruled against him, and he was flown back to face trial in 2016. But even now, 8 years on, Genly Yagon has still not had his day in court. Associates of his business, including his wife, have been found guilty, but as of 2023, he's still being held on remand, awaiting trial on money laundering and weapon charges. Clara Elena Laborin Archuleta. February 2016, Clara was seen in a photo with 2 Mexican federal officers. Her hands were cuffed and her face showed no emotion. This would be a photo of the wife of imprisoned drug lord Héctor Beltrán Leyva, arrested by Mexican authorities for reportedly planning to restart her husband's drug trafficking trade. In the northern city of Hermosillo, Clara, known as La Señora, face the relentless pursuit of law enforcement. Her bold attempt to regain control over Acapulco, once dominated by that Beltran Leyva cartel, thrusted her into this dangerous game, a game that had her name appearing on narco banners all around the city. But why exactly was this the case? Well, for starters, her husband L.H. and his three brothers, Arturo, Alfredo, and Carlos, had previously collaborated closely with their cousin, the infamous Sinaloan trafficker El Chapo, to run the city of Acapulco and its cocaine laboratories. Now, in 2008, L.H.'s brothers started this violent feud with El Chapo. They believed that he had informed the Mexican government about their brother Alfredo's location, leading to his arrest. This conflict escalated, resulting in the killing of one of El Chapo's sons. It also triggered a Scarface-style shootout that claimed Arturo's life and fractured the cartel. January 2016, murmurs of resurgence circulated, especially after El Chapo's recapture. Members of the independent cartel of Acapulco, the cartel now responsible for the drug trade in the city, presumed it was probably El Chapo's sons trying to take over. But it was La Señora. Her quest to continue the work of her husband led to her strong alliance with the powerful Jalisco New Generation cartel. And we all know those guys are ready for war any day, anytime. And you've got to give her some credit, because she had a pretty smart plan there. However, due to failed negotiations caused by a CJ&G hitman, Los Russos, she ended up behind bars. Caught in the crossfire of these power dynamics, Clara Archuleta found herself arrested a few weeks later. She was apprehended with 2 kilos of cocaine and firearms and was taken straight into custody. And in most cases for cartel members, there were no cameras allowed in that courtroom. But judging from that picture of her arrest, she might feel some regret once she's locked up behind bars. Jorge Eduardo Costilla Sanchez. Now, when you do think of the greatest drug lords of all time, a few names do come to mind, but no one really thinks of this man, Mr. Sanchez, who was arguably more ruthless than some of the drug lords you're probably thinking of. Born August 1st, 1971 in the state of Tamaulipas, Mexico, Costilla started off as a regular municipal worker before gaining insight into the drug trade from a few friends. Then in the late 90s, he became friends with the then leader of the Gulf Cartel, Osiel Cárdenas, who indoctrinated him into the cartel, making him one of the high-ranking members due to his sheer enthusiasm for violence. However, along the line of making that drug trafficking business a success, Costilla and Cárdenas stumbled upon 2 DEA spies that came down to their territory, like we said before. If you remember, they wanted to kill him, but they were reminded of the consequences of killing a U.S. citizen and a federal agent, so they let him live, and still face the consequences. March 14th, 2003, Cárdenas was arrested during a shootout with Mexican armed forces. The power of the cartel was then shifted to Costilla, who decided to partner with Cárdenas' brother, Antonio Guillén, along with some other drug lords. But believe us when we say that this was the reason for the Gulf Cartel's civil war, with their constant power tussle and disagreement. It was during this time that the Zetas broke out of that cartel and went to start their own revolution against its former leaders. This might have been one of the bloodiest wars in Mexico's history. But justice eventually caught up with Costilla, because he was arrested on September 12th, 2012, in a neighborhood in Tampico. It's like he knew his time was up, showing no struggle or resist of arrest. And before that arrest, not many people knew who he was, or what he even looked like. Only 2 of his photos were out there. In 2015, he was extradited to the U.S. and handed a life sentence that clearly made him feel regret. Melissa Margarita Calderon Ojeda. Melissa Ojeda, aka La China, aka Mexico's murder queen, was a hardcore assassin and drug trafficker. This woman's solely responsible for over 150 murders in Mexico, and her link to that violence is tied to her being a member of the Sinaloa cartel. La China joined the Sinaloa cartel at the age of 21. Seeing how efficient she was in her duties, the cartel created a smaller faction called the Damaso Cartel for La China and her then boyfriend Eric Davalos von Borsto to operate. But after she was forcefully removed as the head of the Damaso cartel and her boyfriend killed by the new boss, El Grande, La China decided to wage a bloody war against the Sinaloa cartel and El Grande. La China with her gang would kill every associate of El Grande, but the biggest mistake she made was failing to stop the war when she had the chance. After the war escalated and about 133 people were recorded dead, that's when the Mexican police had to step in, linking the origin of the war down to a La China. September 20th, 2015, La China was identified and arrested at the Cabo San Lucas International Airport as she attempted to board a flight to Culiacan. Right now, she's currently imprisoned at La Palma, a max security prison in Mexico. However, many fear she's going to try to break out, just like El Chapo broke out of that same prison back in 2001. After all, they were both in the Sinaloa cartel. Marciano Vasquez. They say he's the devil in human form, and that depiction is rightly so when considering the vile acts Vasquez committed during his time as a high-ranking member of Los Zetas. March 18, 2015, Vasquez and a group of sicarios abducted about 300 people in a remote Mexican village, and then ordered the killing of at least half of the abductees. In another incident that occurred a few years before, Vasquez set a girl on fire and made her parents watch her burn to death. Then he burned her mother and then her father, just wiping that entire family out in a matter of moments. Vasquez was a regional leader of the Zetas. You guys know about this crime syndicate. You know that these guys are some of the most dangerous criminals out there in Mexico and are really capable of things we can't even comprehend. The lighter things are decapitating their victims, cannibalism, and disemboweling their body parts, probably feeding it to wild animals. So the leader of Los Zetas at that time was called El Verdugo, which means the executioner. That should kind of paint a picture of just how brutal these guys were. If we go back to Vasquez, now, he was the guy who had the balls to do anything he was told to do, and was also the guy who ordered sicarios around. He allegedly worked hand in hand with two prominent Mexican politicians, Humberto Morera and his brother, Ruben Morera. Vasquez also coordinated the drug trafficking routes used by the organization in Coahuila by greasing almost every palm with a few dollar bills to ensure their shipments went through without any issues. And the story continues. From trafficking and arms dealing to illicit sales of pornography and human trafficking, this guy dipped his hands in all that was evil. Between 2009 and mid-2015, Vasquez brutally killed about 30 different people in cold blood. July 15, 2015, he was finally arrested and given 7 life sentences on numerous charges. Some argue he should have received the death penalty for what he imposed on hundreds of people. However, since this is not permitted by Mexico's law, he'll just have to spend the rest of his days rotting away behind bars.